Joe Rogan has had like numerous people on his broadcast when he's not talking about, when he doesn't have like a billionaire who, you know, literally drinks the blood of children, like not blood libel. I'm talking straight up billionaires who are doing unironically doing the blood rituals to, I guess, maintain their youthful nature, while simultaneously inventing new ways of killing children overseas. He then turns his crosshairs on to he then will have these guys who seemingly are very anti-Semitic. He's had a couple of these hosts, a couple of these guests on his podcast recently, and this guy is apparently getting a lot of attention from normies. Now, it's an interesting guy. What's his name? Daryl something? I forget. Joe Rogan platforming Holocaust denier and believing him at his word is the logical conclusion of right-wing conspiratorial thought. He's too stupid to keep it a secret. This guy apparently is a historian, but he has some really interesting opinions.
Start going after the Jews.
Daryl Cooper is his name. This is an account that does good noticing, as in noticing Jews. That's what that is, by the way. For those of you who don't know, it's a dog whistle for noticing, how powerful Jews are, or how much Jews control American media and American power, or whatever the fuck. That's what the subtle, or I guess not so subtle way that Nazis try to signal to one another. All right, let's keep going.
You mean in terms of
rhetoric?
So yeah, like if you take him at his word in Mein Kampf, which is, it's a piece of political propaganda, that he wrote as a sort of a politician in Germany in 1924, and so you have to take it with sort of a grain of salt, but it's also one of the few sources we have.
What do you mean? Is he implying that Hitler didn't actually hate the Jews? He was just like doing political speech? He's hitting the New York Times note. Remember that New York Times article from like 1933 or whatever, where they were like, Hitler rising to power is using anti-Semitism, but is he actually an anti-Semite? Probably not. No, he was, man. Like, it's not. What more do you need him to say and do for you to be like, nah, he was legit. Like, he actually hated the Jews. Like, what the It's crazy. Take Mein Kampf with a grain of salt. He wasn't a real one about. He wasn't a real hater. He wasn't a real hater of the Jews. It's like
and given his audience at the time, he probably didn't have a lot of reason to make this part up. Is that he had been from like small town Germany, right? And he was from a middle class family. His father was a civil servant, respectable people, and nationalism back then was very much like a middle class ideology. And the middle class people, nationalists, would complain about the work.
Bro said Germany when talking about Austria. He's like, more Germany. Austria. As in Germany, too.
And, the proletariat, how they all want to be socialists, and none of them have any national feeling and everything. And Hitler really didn't grow up with any really even knowledge of the Jews. He says his father, he never heard him say the word. And, if they had any in the small town that he lived in, like they were apparently well assimilated because he didn't know about them. And so then he moves to Vienna when he's a young adult, and there's a lot of Jews in Vienna. And he starts to, he's at the
Vienna, more Germany, at least according to Hitler. famous German city.
The bottom of society now. He's literally living in shelters. He's hungry all the time. He's like down with the underclass after having grown up in the middle class. And so he's starting to get a look at what the German people, the German masses, that he's like sort of as a child and a young man is like worked up this deep sense of like nationalistic fervor. He's actually getting an up close look at the underclass in Vienna, and what he sees is not particularly impressive, which is often the case when you can have sympathy for and want to lift up, the underclass in any society. But the reason you want to do that is because they're often living degraded lives in degraded circumstances. And so he gets an up close look at this, and he doesn't like what he sees. And he says in Mein Kampf that it really caused him like a moral crisis, and an ideological crisis.
It always weirds me out. Like, look. Nazis and chattel slavery are literally the only two things, perhaps because of its closeness to contemporary history. There's the only two things that like historians will directly stamp like a moral, like not a descriptive, but a moral sentiment that they associate with in a negative way, and for good reason, right? I think it was pop historian Dan Carlin who once famously said like Genghis Khan was a far more violent figure, but because we're so far removed from his impact, we just kind of think of him as a leader of the world that changed the world in a dramatic fashion. He's a pop historian. You might not actually appreciate his perspective or whatever, but I think that he was kind of right on that, where it's like Hitler is too close for people to, for anyone really to associate with as anything but like a truly evil being. Even though you're usually, like historians usually will rarely ever describe previous events throughout history, no matter how world-changing, world-shattering, no matter how violent it is, with any sort of like moralizing. Like it's usually just very matter of fact. Obviously, there's a perspective that people have, a perspective people maintain, but it doesn't have that same stink associated with, like when you talk about Hitler. Now, the reason why I brought all of this up is because it always rubs me the wrong way when I hear someone try to describe the background of Adolf Hitler with like moral ambiguity, or even the growth of the Nazi movement. Because it always feels to me, maybe I'm a baby about it, I don't know, but for me, I don't know anything about this dude. Okay? I don't know anything about this dude. But for me, when I hear someone describe Hitler from the perspective of Hitler, it rubs me the wrong way. It almost feels like you are presenting him in a sympathetic manner almost, where he's like, he's a real guy that got, a real over by forces, let's say, maybe not the Jews, but some forces of a group of individuals from a ethno-religion that, got together and had full control over our financial institutions and also the labor movement at the same time. It's like when you're going beyond offering context to how Hitler got there, and it kind of feels like you're being a little sympathetic, I don't know, maybe being woke, I have a higher degree of sensitivity for stuff like this. But it does rub me the wrong way when I hear anyone who claims to be a historian that talks about Adolf Hitler while also simultaneously approaches it from a sympathetic manner.
He's like, are these the German people? Like, really? This is what we're talking about? And then he says,
because like so far, with some exceptions to what he described, what he's describing is something that, you read in history books, as far as the overarching like feelings of humiliation and economic instability that was in Germany post World War I, the high number of veterans that were riddled with shell shock and seemingly had no job prospects, things of that nature. Like all this stuff definitely played a very important role in the rise of Nazi sentiment and also Hitler's rise to power. Okay, that's correct. It's just the way he's describing Hitler's evolution is strange. That's what I think.
This is the way he relates it. He says it was actually the key that unlocked everything else for him. Is that, he would say he realized, we could say he came to believe that yes, these German masses, they are in a sorry state right now, but The reason for that is that they're being manipulated by the Jews, by the Jewish press, by the the Jews who own the theaters and put out the films and whatever else. All of it, they're being manipulated and corrupted by these people. And so for him, it became like, I think, he had a lot of the same explanations and reasons you would hear from any anti-Semite then or now, banking and whatever. Like all those things were like in there. But I think the thing that gave it emotional valence for him is that his anti-Semitism was what allowed him to love the German people.
What?
Feudal time.
Elon was just on Joe Rogan explaining how he couldn't possibly be a Nazi, and now Joe Rogan is platforming a notorious anti-Semite and Nazi defender. Like, I don't know if people are being hysterical about this guy or if this dude is like a straight up Nazi, but I do feel like he's just kind of covering the story like he might be a straight up Nazi. I don't know. Look, I'm trying to be as open-minded as possible. Now, the reason why I'm trying to be as open-minded as possible to what this guy is saying, okay, is because normies are listening to this dude and approaching me in the real world going, dude, I know you like that Palestine stuff. Have you heard about this guy, Daryl? He has a series called Fear and Loathing in Jerusalem or something like that. Apparently he has like a Israel piece. And that was when I was like, oh no, oh no, no, no. Oh, what the This is like how normies are learning about the conflict. This is how normies are learning about the history of Israel. Okay? And I'm telling you, like, these are not like straight up fascists. Like, these are normal people. I promise. When I say these are normies, I mean they're normies, okay? Germans who like to hide their pro-Nazi regards often talk like him in a group. It's very common in certain circles. Yeah. This is the guy who said on the Tucker Carlson interview that Churchill was the main villain in World War II, right? Is that the guy? And I think that how to treat them is sit down and what? If this is W. Churchill hate? No. As someone who does hate Churchill, I would not say that. I think he's Churchill's done a lot of awful shit, okay? Including to my people. I'm just saying. Never forget Gallipoli, okay? But all jokes aside, and the very serious crimes of Churchill, he was definitely not the bad guy during World War II, okay? Objectively so. The Allied forces were not on the wrong side of World War II. That right there, if you say that there were complex figures involved in World War II that also in their domestic policies or in their in their previous acts of foreign policy have made tremendous mistakes or have done a lot of violence, like that's one thing. But if you're saying Churchill is the main baddie of World War II, I mean, he's not even the top three, okay? We're talking about some real bad dudes, okay? He's not even in the top three. Nowhere near. That's a pretty crazy statement to make. That's all I'm going to say.
And you've got the aristocracy, you got the church, and you got the peasantry. And then you have like another group of people who kind of serves a unique function, but kind of a uniform function across Europe in...
How do you explain Hitler materially without being empathetic? Like in the we're all products of our material conditions of banality, evil type way? Because I do think that he is. Someone else would have been Hitler if Hitler didn't exist. No, I did explain the rise of animosity in Germany and anti-Semitism's role. I literally just did. When I was talking about how he's talking about it versus how I would talk about it, I would cover it.
In the Jews, they would very often be like they played a very kind of critical role in feudal Europe, because they were the only ones who had a network that kind of stretched across the whole place. And so a lot of times like the rulers would have...
I think the funniest question to always ask is like, so if Jews are of one mind, okay, if they are a monolithic force as implied by anti-Semites, why the were they also literally both in positions of incredible importance in finance, while also simultaneously they were the leading revolutionary forces historically? Like, it doesn't make sense. They both On the one, they're a monolithic force, okay? They're a monolithic force, but they also ideologically are both engaging in finance and have doing usury, whatever, but also simultaneously are like revolutionary figures that are communist, socialist, trade unionist. How the is that? Or in college, professors and things of that nature. Like the moment that you look at a banker and a commie and think these guys are operating on the same playing field is a moment where you've become a Nazi. That's it. No, a banker and a labor union leader are not operating with the same mindset. The only way you think that is if you're racist, okay? Is if you're an anti-Semite. That's it. It's that simple. It's ridiculous. And the only way that Jews became monolithic in that process was because their victimhood was identical, because they were destroyed on the basis of being Jewish, not just on what their political ideologies were. Okay? It's always the oppressors that actually don't discriminate in their discriminatory practices that actually end up monolithizing a group of victims. Same with black people in America, okay? The reason why there is a black culture in the United States of America is because of chattel slavery. It is a culture that was born out of having your ancestral ties cut off in its entirety. Black people in America, when they were forcibly brought here, stolen from their homes for a lifetime of slavery, were robbed of their identity, robbed of their ethnicities, robbed of their culture, robbed of their language. And of course, they created like not a monolithic culture, but they were treated as a monolith by oppressors. Same with Nazi Germany and Jews. But beyond that, there's no monolithic force there. It's just so stupid. If there was, there wouldn't be so many goddamn anti-Zionist Jews, okay? If that was the case, if Zionism as a force, as a political force, which does try to monolithize Jews to the best of its ability, if that was successful, if there was like some kind of other supernatural force behind all of this, and that Jews truly were a monolith, then there wouldn't be so many anti-Zionist Jews, okay? Then every Jew would automatically be a Zionist. That is not the case, clearly, in spite of Israel's best attempts to do so.
Of Jews working for them who, they were basically like your diplomatic channels, kind of. You needed to like talk to people over there, or if you needed to raise money for something, they had large capital networks that could help you raise money.
Wouldn't the counterpoint be, but there are black cops and black Republicans? Yeah, no shit. That's why I'm saying black people are not a monolith either. What? No, that's my point exactly. No group of people are monolithic. It just doesn't work that way. We have the capacity to understand that when we talk about the in-groups like white people, right? Everybody understands that white people come from all different parts of the planet, from different parts of Western Europe, right? And there's different varieties, different sauces to white people. So when a white man does an act when a white man does a heinous crime, yes, people say, oh, all white men are like this or whatever the fuck. But like there is no real systemic enforcement of that kind of discrimination. And that isn't like real discrimination to begin with, because everybody deep down inside understands that there is diversity amongst the in-group. You can trace your lineage back to whichever country whichever country your parents or your grandparents came from. Does that make sense? Just to be clear, this is not my opinion. Just imagining opposition counterpoints. Damn, chat. Yeah, I have listened to the Fear and Loathing podcast on Israel, and I thought he was critical of Israel, empathetic to the Palestinians. I really need help understanding what in the pod. The only one I listened to is like 3 parts are the dog whistles. I haven't listened to his podcast on it, and maybe there isn't a lot of dog whistles, but some of the stuff I saw here, he's a very interesting. He has some very interesting takes. A lot of Nazis were upset on like the nerdiest historical references that he made to like immigrant exclusionary acts that the American government has engaged in. And they were trying to like correct him. And he's like, no, you don't understand. I hate immigrants. Like he was like, no. The problem is like, I was explaining to Joe Rogan why America had an unlimited faucet of immigrants, but like what the distinction between the first Immigrant Exclusionary Act was versus the second one. And the first one was so that, like, you know, we wouldn't let black people in from France. And even though we were letting people in from France, we just didn't want them exporting all of their, all of their black and brown people. We didn't even think about the third world and the global south at that time or something like that. That's what he was saying. He's like a fascist apologist academic for sure.
Money for it, things like that. But they weren't, they weren't serfs or peasants. They weren't the aristocracy. They weren't the church. Obviously, they were kind of their separate thing. And most of the time, they were allowed to sort of abide by their own laws, like run their own little societies, like how they wanted, But this was at a time when it was just taken for granted that different classes of people had different privileges and different rights.
Whoa.
Ew. Yeah, and then this guy posted this and immediately posted Adolf Hitler. Since Rogan brought up Hitler with Daryl and people are talking about him, let's actually watch Hitler since we can see it ourselves. Go to the tapes to see what Hitler and Dr. Joseph Goebbels actually said. Does it sound like today? Lol. Just not so subtle. This guy who really likes Daryl Cooper, not so subtle about what Daryl Cooper is implying here. And then he just, dude, this entire thread is just him reposting Hitler speeches. Insane. Anyway, I want to hear more. I want to hear more from Mr. Noticer, though, because there's more here. Daryl Cooper is legit, just like maybe the Nazis weren't that extreme. Yeah. I remember his conversations that he had with Tucker, where he very obviously is just like minimizing the Holocaust.
How did we end up here?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the labor movement, because I've
like, this is apparently where they're talking about socialism, but it's the conversations that he had with Tucker, if I recall correctly, he was just like straight up minimizing the Holocaust. Like he made he made inferences to the final solution being like a logical inevitability, while also simultaneously talking about Jewish people, not with the same language that Hitler uses. Like, he wasn't saying that they're parasitic, but he basically was saying in that conversation that like there was a valid security threat. Like he was assuming Hitler's role or like the Nazis' position as though it was the norm, but he was using language in a way where like he was trying to give himself an out, right? He was trying to give himself an out by saying like, oh, I'm just using descriptive language, right? But it was very obvious that he was like, it's very obvious that he was handing it to the Nazis, if that makes sense. It's a more sophisticated version of anti-Semitism. It's not, if you're conditioned into like seeing dog whistles, then you can quickly grasp that this is just a person who is in a very sinister fashion, in a very cynical manner, trying to engage in Nazi apologia or historical Holocaust revisionism in a way that still affords him some semblance of plausible deniability, rather than just like saying the quiet part out loud. But a lot of the people that love his content, I think, understand what he's saying, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like that people that talk about Israel have this kind of background. I'm not particularly appreciative of some of the loudest seemingly pro-Palestinian voices having this kind of attitude, whether sheltered or unmasked, it doesn't matter. And these guys also then talk about Jeffrey Epstein too, which is another issue that I'm fascinated with. I don't like that they talk about that as well, because they most of the time they engage in the same commentary in a similar structure where they'll like talk about Jeffrey Epstein and his Israel connections. And I think that is understandable to point to and talk about, but they kind of massage it in a way where it's like, yeah, he's Jewish and he was working for Mossad only inside of American boundaries, and isn't that strange that Jews were able to operate in American, inside of the United States of America this way? Like all this is very frustrating, especially if someone is capable of not just doing shallow analysis, but if they're capable of like sheltering or feeding you anti-Semitic conclusions with nuggets of truth. I don't like that. But yeah, I want to see. There was another thing that he said. Like he's like responding to the Joe Rogan quotes from a lot of people. Like this is someone from NYU Review. Daryl Cooper, Hitler wasn't going around giving anti-Semitic addresses in public. Reality, Hitler addressing the entire Reichstag in 1939, declaring that he will annihilate the Jewish race. The context noted him. Hitler gave multiple anti-Semitic speeches prior to chancellorship. I must not have given them much to work with if this is the best they can come up with. It's not remotely controversial that Hitler modulated his anti-Semitic rhetoric based on his audience, and that he was aware that being aggressive about it was a turnoff to many middle-class city dwellers. He hardly made any public remarks about the Jews at all from 1932 to 1935, for example, and it's a fact that Hitler ordered Goebbels to call off the 1938 pogrom because of the negative effect on German public opinion. It's always a good sign when you force liars to speak their native tongue. What? I mean, he did say Hitler was just faking being anti-Semitic in the Mein Kampf. He inferred that, which is ridiculous. The Nazi-Jewish problem was they existed. This was it. Yeah, Hitler tried again, going on the radio broadcast to call for peace directly to the British people. This is what I remember him talking about after the Tucker Carlson interview, and that's when I was like, oh, this guy's a straight up, Holocaust revisionist, because the notion that the Jews are even a problem at all is basically assuming the role of assuming the worldview of Adolf Hitler in 2025. Does that make sense? That's what I was like. That's when I was like, what the f are you talking about? Like, that's an insane thing to state. No, he did. He hated the Jews, man. That's like, he did the Holocaust. I don't know if you know that. Like, it's pretty obvious. He spent a good deal of time hating on Jewish people, actually. Kind of made it his life's work. That's the thing he was known for. Anyway, it's just like I want to listen to his Fear and Loathing in Jerusalem and see if he has more statements like this in it, or if he's just like more honest about the analysis there. But make no mistake, I do think that this man is an anti-Semitic Holocaust revisionist, and I don't think it's wrong to state that he has sympathies for Adolf Hitler. Having said that, that could be a standalone work that he engaged with specifically to open the door to charitability for a lot of other like-minded individuals and Hitler pill them, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think he's a weirdo fascist in general, because he's obsessed with the idea of seemingly obsessed with the idea of like developing ethno-states. Are you saying anti-Semitic based on the IHRA definition? No, dude. What the
afterwards? There were a lot of the
Is
same
this whole thing
explanations
about
and
Hitler,
reasons
by
you
the
would
way?
hear from any anti-Semite then or now, banking and whatever. Like all those things were like in there. But I think the thing that gave it emotional valence for him is that his anti-Semitism was what allowed him to love the German people. Like it was like the only way for him that he could get around the revulsion he was feeling and actually being up close with the German underclass. Is he excused their faults by blaming Jews, and so his sense of love for his people. And I mean,
he was he felt a sense of revulsion for the German middle class and the German underclass because he was a fascist, but he coped in his mind by saying, no, the Jews made them this way. Got it.
Look, Hitler's one of those guys. I noticed this when I was reading all the Jim Jones books and stuff, which I think I read probably all of. They're not very good. Some of them are interesting, like they're good reads, but you can't help but notice, especially after you've read several of the books, that the authors just cannot help but be like cynical and turn it into a polemic on every page. Like even the thing Jim Jones or Hitler did as a child, they have like negative editorializing to it and everything. And it's like, it really kind of, it's a lot of them are still.
He's like, I wouldn't go back in a time machine and kill baby Hitler. And I instead hate when I hate when people editorialize baby Hitler. I don't even think you should besmirch the name of baby Adolf Hitler, let alone go back in a time machine and kill him. That's amazing. You should not tarnish the good reputation of baby Hitler, dog. What the he might grow up to be Hitler if you do that.
Good books.
Why is nobody humanizing baby Hitler? He's just a little guy.
You know, you read like the most recent sort of great Hitler biography by Ian Kershaw is a great book. He's a good historian, an excellent writer. And, you know, you have to learn to kind of see through that polemic a little bit, and then you have, you know, a good history on your hands.
It's almost like it's an obligation. If you're going to cover a horrific figure, you have to look at things that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a, and so I think that like people who knew Hitler before World War I, and we have like memoirs and interviews.
They love the guy. He was a great, he was a party animal. Okay. Oh God. With a particular taste for methamphetamines. He was so fun to be around.
With people who did know him pretty well. They say pretty much unanimously, like we never heard him mention the Jews back then. And this is the period in Vienna when Hitler says his anti-Semitism was developing and he was figuring these things out. And what I think was probably going on, like my read of it, at least up to this point, is that his anti-Semitism, just like a lot of people in Europe at the time, was theoretical and abstract. You know what I mean? Like the Jews had never. You got to remember.
As opposed to what? What? As opposed to what? How can racism exist in any other form other than theoretical and abstract? Like, is he trying to say like he hadn't done the Holocaust yet? Is that what it is? Because yeah, that's just how it develops. That's how all bigotry develops. It's theoretical and abstract. Unless you think that like there is, I don't know, maybe I'm misunderstanding what he's saying, but unless you think he literally had a valid reason to hate all Jews, then all hatred of that sort is theoretical and abstract. He might just simply be talking about how maybe at that point Hitler was a non-practicing anti-Semite.
Like the Russian Revolution, all of the things that people like Hitler would associate with the Jews, like none of that stuff had happened yet. Like he might not like them, you know, he might think that, whatever, all the stereotypes that go along with him, but it was just sort of an abstract thing that it wasn't dangerous, right? But then the First World War happens.
It wasn't dangerous.
And, you know, it's really impossible for us today to understand the level of...
Reinhard Heydrich, who planned the Holocaust, actually had a friendly rapport with a fellow Jewish student in school, yet. Yeah. It's crazy because, like, it's crazy to have these... Like, I don't have an issue with trying to assess how Hitler's anti-Semitism came to fruition. That is a perfectly valid and perfectly reasonable and very instructive thing to do. Okay? That's important to understand. It's important to recognize. It's important to figure out so, you know, we can stamp it out, right? You should learn about that. Just like with the Holocaust, you should learn about it. But it's weird to talk about it as though, you know, he was personally wronged. Like if that's where he's going to go with this, where he was like, well, you know, when he went to art school, he was denied entry because of a famous Jewish artist and his like morally degenerate artwork that was seen as cutting edge at the time. And that's what really ticked him off. Like that's, you know, that's an insane reason to do the Holocaust. You know what I mean? That's like, it's like doing comedy at that point. You're making a joke, I think. The one time someone was like, your artwork sucks dick, dog. He was like, I'm going to come back and show you. Okay.
Just trauma and devastation that war had on, I mean, the European countries that were in, or all the countries that were involved. I mean, it was, you know, you're talking about a war where, you know, for several Olympic Games afterwards, there were whole sports that like France and Germany just didn't participate in anymore because they didn't have the people for it. I mean, you're talking about massive chunks of the young male population being killed out there, right? And you take a guy like Hitler, who volunteered early, like right away, and he survived the whole 4 years of the war, and you think about him as just an example of this generation of people who spent like their most formative young adult years in the trenches. I mean, in constant terror of doing things that, I mean, forget about.
Bro's talking about Adolf he's on a first name basis. He said, you take a guy like Hitler, you know, good guy. You know, you take a guy like Hitler, right? He's just a guy. What the oh, Jesus Christ. He's a good guy. He volunteered for the German he volunteered for the German military right away. He got the call to action, you know, the call of duty was in his heart. Real patriot. Real misunderstood patriot. Love the guy. Okay, Joe, let me tell you, I love this guy, okay?
Just like the physical discomfort of living there. I mean, you're in the mud, you're covered with lice and fleas all the time. So is everybody else. You're, especially later in the war, you're like living off of starvation rations if you're a German or an Austrian. And you're watching, I mean, you know, Dan Carlin's series on World War I is like probably my favorite piece of audio.
Incredible.
It's so good. And like, you know, one of the things he's so good at, way better than me at.
Didn't Dan Carlin call this guy a Nazi? That's another classic Joe Rogan guest, but I guess Joe is Joe no longer has guys like that on as much. He mostly focuses on guys like this instead, if you know what I mean.
Is kind of capturing the scale of events, you know? And so when he talks about like the Battle of the Somme, when the British lost 60,000 guys on the first day, you're like, I don't even know what that even means. Like it's just so overwhelming, you know? And so you have this generation that spent.
It's crazy because like famously no one else engaged in trench warfare, and famously no one else before or after ever experienced such traumatic events, famously. Because otherwise, how else are you going to do the Holocaust, right? Like if that's the primary reason why it happened, I feel like, you know, why is the mechanized death of the industrialized version of death during the Holocaust so singular for Europe? Because they had pogroms. They did a ton of pogroms in Europe and in Russia, right? But this was a little different, you know?
Their formative years.
And there was also obviously plenty of other countries that didn't do that, despite the horrific nature of war that they also exhibited, that they also experienced.
In all of these countries, under those just circumstances that we really don't have any context for us to relate to, you know? I mean, think about like, you see these stories of like people sleeping in trenches, and over there in the corner is their dead friend who's been sitting there decomposing and being eaten by rats for 3 or 4 days because you can't go up top to bury him because you'll get shot. And you can't bury him in the trench, in the dirt under the trench anymore because there's already bodies just completely wall to wall down there. You've already taken up all the space, right? Just that kind of, I mean, if you think about somebody today, if you walk outside your door on the way to work, your average person today, and there's a dead body on your you know, steps, your average person today is going to be in therapy for years over that, you know? I mean, that is a traumatic experience. Very.
Yes, bro, we know. We saw All Quiet on the Western Front. Some of us even read it, okay? We know it was bad. Come on, move on. I want to hear, like, God damn, dude. He's just, like, really
difficult, unbelievable experience. And from Germany east.
Yes, World War I was particularly brutal, yes.
Word after. You know, if you go back and think about what the map of Europe looked like in the year 1900, it didn't look anything like it looks now. It was basically like just a few big chunks. You know, you had France, you had Germany, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then you had the Russian Empire. And there were a few like Spain and the Balkans and stuff, little things going on, but really it was just a few giant empires controlled everything from the Pacific Ocean in East Russia all the way over to the coast of France, right? And everything east of Germany
Is this guy trying to sympathize with the Nazis? No, he is sympathizing with the Nazis. He's not trying to. He is actively. If he's trying real hard, okay, and succeeding. As a matter of fact, he is succeeding. He's successfully sympathizing with the Nazis. Now, he might not come across as sympathetic if you know what he's saying, but he has succeeded so hard that I would maybe say he might be a Nazi. I don't know. But
1917, 1918, those governments literally evaporated. They went away. And so, you get to the immediate post-war period after these guys have just gone through this unbelievably harrowing experience. Their lives have been defined by violence for years, at this point. And all of a sudden there's just state collapse everywhere from Germany to Siberia. And you literally have, private militia.
You know what's crazy, by the way, about talking about this from the perspective of, here, I'll tell you exactly why this is sympathetic to Hitler. Okay? World War I was a harrowing experience. Trench warfare, bodies decaying right next to you, children that you grew up with their heads blown out, rats eating their carcasses. Yeah, dude. You know who else was also fighting in the German military? Jews. None of them became Hitler. What are you talking about? What do you mean? What are you talking about? The Jews were also in the German military in World War I. They were in the trenches next to Hitler. What kind of stupid statement is this? He's like, yo, but you don't understand. Hitler was really down bad, dude, because of World War I. Yeah, okay. So were the German Jews that were also fighting alongside Adolf. What the And Frank's father, Otto, was famously a World War I veteran who was awarded the Iron Cross by the Kaiser. Yeah. You know why we know about Adolf? Because out of all of the Germans that fought in World War I, there was one Adolf, dude. It's just the guy. Okay? Yeah, what did they get? 100,000 Jews served in the German military in World War I. More than 10,000 of them were killed in the process. You know what Adolf did? He turned around and killed the rest. That was his thank you to the homies that he fought in the trenches with. What do you mean? What is this statement? What kind of stupid shit is this? I don't understand how no one is going, wait a minute. Joe, I know Joe has an ape brain, okay? I know he has an ape brain. But in your ape brain, you have to be like, wait a minute. But the Jews were, there's some Jews in Germany at the time. Did they fight? Were they also fighting? Why didn't they also, why didn't they turn into Adolf Hitler? I don't understand. Why was this what is this?
Groups of veterans, communist militias, they're running cities. They're running the streets, having running gun battles in the streets of Berlin and Munich. And this is
the other side of the story is, ironically enough, some of the first Jews that Adolf Hitler sent to the concentration camps and killed were literally directly the people that didn't want Germany to join World War I to begin with. Those were the Jews he killed first. So every part of this story is stupid. Every part of his analysis is dumb. It was literally the revolutionary Jews that were like, yo, let's not engage in state warfare. This shit sucks. International proletarian, rise up. You know what I mean? And then they kind of continued with that attitude as well, where they were like, look at what's going on in Russia. Maybe we should do that here. And then Hitler was like, F you. No. He thinks that's way worse. Oh.
This goes on for a few years, just total social and economic chaos. And
that makes sense,
so you're talking about the 4-year war, but then a few more years after that. So you're 18 when you get in, and 1914. Now it's 1923 when things kind of start to stabilize, and you've been at this for the first 9 years of your young adulthood, right? This is the world that you live in, and it's
Hitler's anti-Semitism came from previously entrenched anti-Semitic rhetoric, not World War I trauma. Hitler abused and exploited the trauma and state of Germany post-World War I to create national fascist sentiment. Yeah, I think that also is the other incredibly stupid part of the story, that somewhat serves the purpose of like Hasbara propaganda too, in a weird way, but that's not surprising. Benjamin Netanyahu, top Hasbarist Benjamin Netanyahu, is also a Holocaust revisionist, famously. But that kind of abdicates the responsibility of anti-Semitism, historic anti-Semitism, and centuries of pogroms from the hands of Christians. Okay, as though like it wasn't already a historically significant fall guy, as though Jews were not always singled out. Okay, since Jesus, like yeah, Hitler was basically plagiarizing a lot of the anti-Semitism shit. It's not like he invented it. I would say the Russians perfected it, really. I mean, holy shit. So the idea that he you know, had a traumatic incident and then after World War I like became anti-Semitic because of just, I don't know. I don't even know what he's trying to say here. Maybe I'm just not understanding. But it is strange to act like nascent anti-Semitism had not existed, and also overt anti-Semitism had not existed in perpetuity, especially in Christian Europe. Like, yeah, he was a guy, just like most guys at the time, was deeply suspicious and anti-Semitic.
It's when you try to think of, you know, I talked about like Uday Hussein being brought to watch torture sessions or something. I mean, this is not exactly that, but it's an experience that like we really have no way to relate to. And if you grow up in that world, especially when, you know, if you look at like what happened in Russia, 1917, the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and they won. You know, they actually took over the Russian state and created the Soviet Union. You know, it lasted past the...
I feel like he doesn't like that.
Long past the lives of anybody who had fought in World War I, for the most part. And so people saw that, and they took the lesson, both from World War I itself, but also from the aftermath and the revolutions that happened. The lesson they took is that violence can accomplish our goals, you know, and whatever we do to accomplish those goals, as long as we survive, people accept it eventually. You know, Roosevelt normalized relations with the Soviet Union in 1933 when Stalin was literally still clearing bodies from the millions of people he starved in the Ukrainian Holodomor, and in Kazakhstan, another million people. And like at that time is when, and we knew it was going on, obviously.
He's like, now that's a real genocide. Joe, let me tell you, Hitler misunderstood. Stalin, real genocide guy. This is past the point of double genocide theory, where you inevitably arrive at the logical conclusion that who was a worse guy? Well, maybe Stalin. He killed a lot more. You know what I mean?
And yet,
yeah,
you know,
from double genocide theory to single genocide theory, but in the opposite direction. Yeah. That's the reason why double genocide theory is a form of Holocaust revisionism that inevitably leads to, well, look at the Black Book of Communism. Like, look at how many people Stalin killed. Look how many people Mao killed. Like, they killed a lot more. Maybe we were on the wrong side on World War II. That's like inevitably the conclusion that the reader is supposed to be left with.
Roosevelt normalized relations with Stalin, and people got over it. Just like with Turkey. Turkey does the Armenian genocide, and it's condemned at the time. You know, they were on the other side of the war and everything. But a couple years later,
was it? Wait, what? No, I don't think it was. I'm pretty sure. Wait, what? No. Wait, what did? Let me see. Oh no, yeah. Here, I don't know if this is a real quote or not. This is from the ArmenianGenocide.org Hitler, but this is something I recently heard that I didn't even know Hitler had said. But who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians? Does Turkey not still deny that? Yes, of course. No, Turkey still denies it. Turkey pulled the Japanese mode and just basically were like, nah, that's not real. Shut up. The Ottoman Empire was dismantled. What the fuck does that dude mean? I know, but it doesn't. Yes, the Ottoman Empire was dismantled, but I don't think he's like factoring that in as like the crime of the Ottoman Empire in general. I think he's just simply saying like Turkey did the Armenian genocide, which is a strange I understand why he would say it like that, but he has made a lot of erroneous claims thus far, and I'm surprised that, like, as a historian, he's not hitting he's not actually using language very deliberately, especially when talking about genocide. Is crazy.
Like, look, Turkey's an important strategically placed country, like, in the world, and we kind of need them on our side. And so, sorry, Armenians, but, get over it. And so people took that lesson, is that violence will accomplish our goals.
Bro, that's crazy. So Hitler learned that violence will accomplish his goals from the real genocide that Stalin did. Okay. And then he learned that people don't care about the genocide from the real genocide that the Turks did. Okay. But Hitler's genocide himself was like, I don't know, maybe it's not so real. Like, man, Hitler was learning a lot of lessons, man. It's crazy. It's crazy. He was just learning so many lessons around the world. It's wild. Just a misunderstood guy, I think.
And as long as we accomplish them and survive, people will get over it,
Oof. But again, I think this is what's really important about your work, is that you do take into consideration all these aspects, which, again, with Jim Jones, that's fine.
Yeah.
But even what you're saying is, it's obviously very relevant to what when we're trying to understand how World War II happened. How did the Nazis rise to power? Like, what are we talking about? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about this horrific environment that's not considered. Doesn't make you a Nazi apologist.
Yeah, and it's important to know, too, that, it's not like Hitler was going and giving big speeches at City Square in Berlin, going on and on and on about how we're going to kill the Jews. And the German people said right on, like...
No, he did do that. He definitely did that. This was the correction that he did. He did do that. There are only two possibilities: either victory of the Aryan or the annihilation of the Aryan and the victory of the Jew. April 4th, 1922. He wrote about it. He basically talked about it all the time. Now, I guess, like, again, there's plausible deniability in the way that Daryl Cooper is talking about this, where he can just say, like, oh, well, he was just, like, hiding. He was just hiding his anti-Semitic tendencies. No, he wasn't. Okay. He just didn't bro write a whole book about his struggle. Yeah. His struggle with the Jews. Like, this is even before we get to the Holocaust. Okay. Even before he rose to power, he actively talked about the Jews. He did. So that part is incorrect.
Like, let's go do it. That was... Like, the speeches that are out there where he is talking about the Jewish question, like, almost all of those are, like, internal Nazi party, like, rally speeches, They're not him. He had to be careful about that. Like, in 1938, which is pretty far down the line, when Kristallnacht happened, it was kind of a nationwide pogrom against the Jews in Germany that was launched primarily by Goebbels, the propaganda minister. But there was outrage in the German cities. People in Berlin, a lot of the places, were outraged by what was going on. And Hitler had to actually get on the phone with Goebbels and say, cut this out. Like, this is not good. Like, not because he loves the Jews all of a sudden, obviously, but because this is bad propaganda. People are not going for this. And that was the year before the war started, And so these are just nuances that, that become pretty obvious when you just remind yourself that you're just talking about people. They're just people. I mean, the Germans were a sophisticated, advanced political and cultural, place. They didn't suddenly turn into demons for 12 years and then go back to being the nice, normal Germans that we know now. Like, these things happened the same way every other historical event,
Okay. Like, what? It's so confusing because on the one hand, he's explaining how, like, anti-Semitism and, like, fascist propaganda sets in the collective consciousness of a society, which there is an analog for, by the way, and not anti-Semitism, but fascism, and how it actively needs a outside group that must be ritualistically humiliated, dehumanized. I don't know. Israel, pretty good analog. Okay. But having said that, the way he's approaching the subject matter almost makes it seem like he just keeps saying like Hitler was a small bean and you know, Goebbels was bad guy. Hitler was like, dude, cut it out. You're killing too many. Don't do it. Like, what the The Daily Wire is about to have a meltdown. Get Thomas Massey on YouTube 100% nerfing the reach on this. Being called anti-Semitic doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just an attempt at character assassination. If Joe had 3 guests, if Joe has all 3 guests in March, Ian Carroll, Daryl Cooper, next Candace Owens, will make Daily Wire and Free Press people brains melt. Yeah, there's a growing movement in the right that is just like, yeah, we don't fuck with the Jews movement, like straight up. I think that is what's going on, which is interesting because, yeah, if left unrestrained, of course it was going to happen, you know? It seems like I'm noticing a rift in the right where on the one hand, you got the Groyper right, and then on the other hand, you got like the neocon right that's like, you know, hate speech is completely acceptable unless you say something about Israel, in which case I want you to be sent to a concentration camp. There's the like both sides want on the right, both sides want concentration camps. One side wants to put anti-Zionists in the concentration camps first. The other side wants to put everybody and the Jews in the concentration camps. And historically speaking, the side that wants to put everyone, including all Jews, in the concentration camp kind of wins out in that battle, in that internal strife. Okay? When you got two different sides, when you got two different sides of fascism, and one is philo-Semitic maybe, or still anti-Semitic but pro-Israel, and the other side is anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, and only cares about the anti-Semitic side of things, then usually the anti-Semitic side of things actually wins out in that battle, I think.
Ends up happening, which very often is not, you know, what you find is it's not so much is not really like the result of a plot.
Make no mistake, we're still going to the concentration camps for both of these guys. Okay, this community, we're done. You know what I mean? Both sides actively get together when they think about like a person who has progressive values at all, like any progressive values, done to the camps. But there is a little bit of internal strife happening at this moment, I think.
Plan or anything. People are often just reacting. And when you see this with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, you see it with the Israel-Palestine situation, right? In those two situations, like the means that the Bolsheviks and the Zionists used to establish themselves and create their state and like sort of...
I've listened to Daryl's podcast for years. He's very close with Jocko Willink. He's a classic American right-winger who thinks, of course, the Holocaust was bad, but agrees with 90% of Hitler's takes. That's such a funny way to describe modern American right-wingers because it's so true. That's the reason why so many in Asmongold's community, for example, will on the one hand be like, oh, yuck, Hitler, I hate him. Nazis, they suck. And then they'll be like, honestly, gotta hand it to the guy when they find out about like the first book burnings being trans medical research. You know what I mean? That is a very interesting and very funny dichotomy in the American mind. The glaringly obvious cognitive dissonance of contemporary Republicans and contemporary conservatives that just on the one hand will be like, yeah, Hitler is a bad guy. That's what I was taught in school. But also, the more I learn about the things that the Nazis did, the more I'm like, yeah, maybe the Jew stuff wasn't, maybe the Jew stuff was a bridge too far, but like everything else, the socialists being sent to the camps, like that's, yeah, I hate those blue-haired DEI freaks. You know what I mean?
Get their foothold. The means that they used were so violent and so over the top that it came to define in a lot of ways the subsequent history of those countries. You know, if you look at like Stalin's purges in the 30s and a lot of the stuff that was going on during his reign, was really that like they had pissed so many people off and done so many terrible things to take power. And that was really like, that was Lenin's philosophy, is again, just, you know, take it up to 11 and go. And as long as we win, people get over it. But all of a sudden, when you've killed all these people and done all these terrible things, you look around the country and you see a lot of dangerous people who probably don't like you, even if they're not saying it right now. And you start to get a little paranoid, and it becomes kind of the definition of how your state works. You know, I mean, Israel, one of the things I really tried to philosophy is, again, just, you know, take it up to 11 and go. And as long as we win, people will get over it. But all of a sudden,
what a fantastic way to describe Lenin. Yeah, he was just tuning it up to 11. He was like, let's do violence, dude.
when you've killed all these people and done all these terrible things, you look around the country and you see a lot of dangerous people who probably don't like you, even if they're not saying it right now. And you start to get a little paranoid, and it becomes kind of the definition of how your state works. You know, I mean, Israel, one of the things I really...
Bro, comparing Lenin to Hitler and then to Israel, like, that is... what is happening?
really tried to get into in the early part of that series, especially.
It's so revealing when you, as a quote unquote podcast historian, have 8.5 hours of Hitler's speeches dialed up, okay, downloaded to your brain, and you can find the intricacies and the nuances within all of it to explain away how Hitler was just a classic guy but misunderstood. But then with Lenin, you're like, he's just a violent guy who was really paranoid. Like, that's insane. I'm perhaps thinking you might be a Nazi, man. I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Especially
because, like, it almost feels like you're carrying the same resentments that Hitler did.